Hey everyone, and welcome back.
What are we digging into today?
Well, this time, it's something that seems to be in the headlines every time election season rolls around.
Oh, you must mean drug legalization.
You got it. We're diving headfirst into all the upcoming drug legalization efforts. We've got a whole stack of articles, research papers, the works.
And it's not just the usual suspects like marijuana anymore, is it?
You're telling me 4 states are tackling recreational marijuana. But get this, one state is diving headfirst into the world of psychedelics.
Wow, that is interesting. Which state is taking that leap?
Massachusetts. It's all laid out in this Newsweek article we're looking at, along with a bunch of other ballot initiatives voters will be facing this November. But before we get ahead of ourselves, Florida man strikes again.
Right.
Florida, always a headline grabber. Their Amendment 3, the one about legalizing recreational marijuana. Total political drama brewing there.
Yeah, what's the deal with former President Trump supporting it and Governor DeSantis totally against it? It's like they're from different planets. You hit the nail on the head. It exposes this growing rift within the Republican Party, some leaning towards individual freedom, others clinging to, more traditional values.
So are we witnessing, like, a realignment of the political landscape when it comes to social issues like this?
Could be. This DeSantis-Trump clash over marijuana might be a sign of things to come. Definitely something to keep an eye on. But let's switch gears geographically for a sec.
Okay, where are we headed?
The Midwest. North and South Dakota, believe it or not, are offering a fascinating contrast in approaches to this whole legalization wave.
So what's the story there? It's all about marijuana, right?
Pretty much. North Dakota, they already have their medical marijuana program, and, well, they seem a bit more hesitant about recreational use. Their ballot initiative has people fired up on both sides.
And South Dakota.
They're going full steam ahead, voting on recreational marijuana, even though medical isn't even legal there yet. Talk about a bold move.
Wow. Why such a drastic difference in approaches?
I think it boils down to that fundamental question: individual liberty versus what's best for society as a whole. Those for it in South Dakota say adults should be able to make their own choices, right? As long as they're not hurting anyone else. Plus, they argue about the potential tax revenue and fewer marijuana-related arrests.
I can see that side of it for sure, but there are always two sides to every coin. What are the arguments against it?
Those against it are worried about the potential societal costs, like addiction rates going up, impaired driving, and the impact on young people. It's a complex issue, really, with valid points on both sides.
It always seems to come down to finding that balance, doesn't it? So where does that leave Nebraska? They're not exactly known for being on the cutting edge of, well, anything.
You're not wrong, but they're actually taking a very cautious approach this time around. 2 separate ballot initiatives, can you believe that?
Two, what are they trying to do?
Well, the first one is about legalizing medical marijuana for people who qualify. Makes sense, right? But the second one is interesting. They're aiming to establish a whole commission to oversee everything about the program.
So they are trying to be careful about it, not just jumping on the bandwagon.
Exactly. It shows they understand that just saying yes to a substance isn't enough. You got to have rules, regulations, oversight to make sure it's done right.
Makes you wonder, are they going to be the model for how to implement these programs, or will they hit some roadblocks along the way?
But hold on to your hats, folks, because we're about to dive into the deep end. We're talking psychedelics.
Oh, that's going to be interesting.
It really is. Massachusetts is on the verge of becoming a psychedelic pioneer with question 4 on their ballot. And we're not just talking medical marijuana here.
This is next level stuff, right?
Yeah.
Legalization of not just therapeutic use, but also having it, growing it, even having a system for psychedelic services. Who would have thought we'd see this just a few years ago? Definitely not me. This could be huge. But we should probably unpack all the arguments for and against question 4 after a quick break. Stay with us. We're back and diving right back into the deep end, talking about Massachusetts and their question 4. It's not just a little step, it's a huge leap. They're talking about a whole system for psychedelics, not just medical use. It's kind of blowing my mind. What are the arguments for this even?
Well, there's this group, the Massachusetts for Mental Health Options campaign. They're all about it. They're saying psychedelics like psilocybin could totally revolutionize mental health care.
Revolutionize. That's a big word to use. What makes them think that?
There's been some really promising research showing that in the right setting, with the right guidance, psilocybin can be really helpful for PTSD, anxiety, even addiction.
Okay, that makes sense, but I'm sure not everyone's on board with this. It seems kind of, I don't know, radical.
Oh, for sure. There are definitely people who are hesitant, even some medical professionals. They see the potential, but they're worried about the risks, especially with the idea of people growing their own at home. They're worried about, a black market popping up and things getting out of control. It's a tough one, trying to find that balance between giving people freedom and making sure everyone's safe.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation.
Hmm.
And this isn't just about letting people have a good time. It's about changing how we think about mental health altogether. I mean, for the longest time, addiction was seen as a moral failing, not a health issue. But now we're starting to understand that it's often connected to trauma, mental illness, lack of access to proper care. It's not so black and white anymore.
You're right. It's way more complicated than that. And that's why what Massachusetts is doing is so fascinating. It has the potential to change everything. It could shift us away from punishing people and toward a more compassionate approach, one that focuses on public health and harm reduction. It could change how we see addiction, how we see mental illness. It's huge.
It's like we're watching a whole new way of thinking unfold right in front of us.
Mhm.
But let's get practical for a second. How would this even work in reality? They're talking about a regulatory framework, right? What does that even mean?
Right. So the idea is to have this commission, the Natural Psychedelic Substances Commission, along with an advisory board. They would be the ones figuring out all the nitty-gritty, like who can be a therapist, what licenses are needed, how treatment centers would work. It's a huge job, and everyone will be watching to see how they handle it.
It's like they're setting the stage for a whole new world, and the world is watching to see if they succeed. What do you think, listeners? Are you on board with this potential psychedelic revolution, or are you a little more cautious? It's definitely something to think about.
You know, No matter what side of the fence you're on, one thing's for sure. The way we talk about drugs in America is changing, and fast. All these ballot initiatives, from Florida's marijuana measure to what Massachusetts is doing with psychedelics, it shows that people are ready for a new approach. They're ready to rethink our relationship with these substances.
It's like we're finally asking the important questions, the ones we should have been asking all along. What if instead of locking people up, we gave them support? What if we explored the potential benefits of these substances instead of demonizing them? We're finally having these conversations, and it's about time.
I agree, it's long overdue. And listen, whether these ballot initiatives pass or not, this conversation isn't going away. These debates are forcing us to confront some fundamental questions about our freedom as individuals, about what's best for society, about the role of government.
It's a lot to think about, and we're not done yet. We still need to look at the bigger picture. What do all these ballot initiatives tell us about how drug policy is changing in America? Are we on the cusp of a new era? We'll be back to discuss that right after this. And we're back. All right, so we've traveled all over the country, from Florida to the Dakotas, even taken a bit of a trip to a potential future with Massachusetts and psychedelics. So where does this leave us? What have we learned about drug legalization in America?
Well, one thing's for sure. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. Every state's got its own approach, its own unique flavor.
Like a buffet in drug policies.
Exactly. And what's interesting is these aren't just political footballs, are they? They touch on some really fundamental questions about our freedom as individuals, what we believe as a society, and the role of the government.
And it's not just about legal or illegal anymore. It's about so much more. We're talking about addiction, mental health, social justice, even.
You said it. The war on drugs, for instance. It was supposed to solve things, but it really ended up hitting marginalized communities the hardest. That's something we can't ignore.
Definitely not. So are we saying we need to throw out the old rule book and start from scratch?
Not necessarily, but we need to be open to new ways of thinking, be willing to admit when something's not working. This isn't a black and white issue. There's a lot of gray area here.
So what's the answer then?
Yeah.
How do we move forward?
Well, for starters, we have to stay informed, right? We can't just listen to the loudest voices. We have to dig deeper, understand the nuances of the issue.
And what about all these different state laws? It's like a patchwork quilt out there. What happens if someone crosses state lines?
That's a whole other can of worms, right? It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out, that's for sure. But the important thing is the conversation has started. People are asking questions, challenging the status quo.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
Stay curious, stay engaged, and don't be afraid to have those tough conversations. We can't just bury our heads in the sand. This affects all of us.
Well said. And on that note, we've explored the choppy waters of drug legalization, but the conversation is far from over. Keep those questions coming and those minds open.